Welcome back, and in this lesson we're going to build out an image carousel using JavaScript. So what we need in our web page is we need to basically create our image. So I'm just going to set up an image. I'm going to give it an ID so that we can grab it, and this is going to be just my image. And the source right now, we don't actually need to have a source because we're going to add the source in dynamically with JavaScript. So this is actually all we need in order to initiate our project. And all we need is a function in order to start our image carousel. So let's set up some basic parameters for our images. So I want to generate some dynamic images here. I'm going to use placeholder as well that we used last time. And we also need a holder. So this one will just be my IM image place. So we're going to start that out at 0 so we can start out with the first image in the array. Next, let's set up an array that's going to actually contain all of our images. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to just output numbers here. So you could also do this as well and actually have real images. So I just want to save some time here, and I'm going to use the placeholder anyway. So that will give me a variety of images, and I'm going to set different values on those images. And also I want to also have another array where I have colors. So images C. So this will be my array which corresponds to that and saves me the trouble of building out images where I can simply output them the colors here. So let's create some colors. So we do some different shades. It actually doesn't matter which colors I'm using. And let's do. So we have a wide variety. I just want to have the same amount of colors as there are items in the array above. And let's add one more color in. So there. So we've got our variety of colors, we've got our images, so everything is all ready to go. And now all we need to do is set up and change our image picture. So we need a couple functions for that. So let's set up a function to switch image. So this function is solely gonna swap our images, and we're gonna increment the value of image. So increment value of image place by 1. So basically this will change the image. Once we go over to the SWI image, so this should be for switch or swap. Let's call it swap image. So this will actually swap the image to the next one within the array. So now we just need to update and build out our image. So let's set a variable and create a holder for that image that we've got within our HTML so that we can grab that particular image. And here we're going to do my image, and this is document get element by ID, and it was my image. The ID was my image. So we'll grab that value, and the next line we can set our source. So it's my image and source, and then we need to specify the source for the images. So we're going to use the placeholder.com as well. So same thing that we did last time, and then we'll just adjust some of the parameters. So we know that we've got a parameter here for colors. So we can take the array, this array, and we'll use whatever value is in image place. And this is turning out fairly long, but next we need to do a slash. So we'll do a slash for the color. And then lastly, let's update that text on the image. So we'll have it equal to image, and then I'll make the last value dynamic as well. So this is going to be whatever the value of image is, image place index is. So let's refresh the page and we'll try it out. So notice that we don't have an image set yet. So we can open up our console, and that function was swap image. So when we do that, we see that we can create our image. And again, if we do it again, we change to the next image and next image and next image. So we know that the next step is to fire off that particular function. So what we need is another function that can continuously loop and fire that off. So we saw earlier where we had a timeout interval, but this time let's have another interval that we're going to use. And this one is going to set a constant interval. So this interval will constantly keep firing off, and this is exactly what we need for our images. So we don't want it just to fire off one time and stop. We want it to fire off over and over again. So I'm just wrapping it in a function to start image. And then within here, we're using the built-in method. So this is set interval. And basically it calls a function or executes a code snippet repeatedly with a fixed time delay between each call. So it works very similar to the other interval that we saw earlier, where all we need to do is specify a function that we want to fire off, and then how often we want to fire it off, and again in milliseconds. So every 2000 milliseconds will be every 2 seconds. So let's try this out. And we're still going to be missing one other thing. So let's fire off, start image. And now that we fire this off, we see that now we're getting images and it's firing off. It's alternating every 2 seconds. So the last thing that we need is we need a way whenever the page loads that we fire off start image to get this image carousel started. So what I want you to do now, pause the video and write that into the script. And we have looked at this before, that there's a number of ways that whenever the body loads or the window loads, that we can fire off a function. So I'll show you the solution coming up. So I hope you had an opportunity to review what we looked at before, and there was a number of ways. So we could do the window onload, or we could do the onload attribute. So I'm just going to do the onload attribute within here, and it's as simply just grabbing this function so that whenever the page loads, that we just fire off the start image. And we saw how that was working earlier. And there's actually one thing here that I've noticed that is still going wrong, is that we've got image undefined. Because what's happened is our image place has run out of images. So that's why that is happening. So what I want you to do now is pause the video and come up with the solution for that. So we know that we've run the course, we've run through all these images, and we know that arrays have a length. So we can grab that length, and if our images have passed the length, then we've got to reset this back to 0. So try that out, and I'll show you the solution for that. So the solution for that is a conditional statement. So whenever we need any piece of logic applied, we always turn to conditional statements, and this is where we can ask that question. If this value has actually exceeded the length of our images array, then we know that we've got to stop this and we've got to reset it. So if that has happened, then all we have to do is reset it back to 0. And I'm going to swap this out to be 1 second. Go back out, refresh the page. So now we see we've got it triggered, we've started it, we've gone through, and we're hitting 7, and we're going to undefined and 1. So we're still running into a problem here that this is still running too long, so we need to update it with the equal sign, and that way we know we're only going to run till 7. So there's one other thing that also we should update, and take care of. So do you know what that is going to be? Notice that whenever we trigger and we start the image, we don't have a default image loaded in there. So there's a number of options that can take care of that. So what I want you to do again is pause the video and come up with a solution how we can have a default image on the start. So notice that it's completely blank and then it goes 2, 3, 4. So it waits that 1 second before it actually loads the image. So go ahead and try it out. And I'm going to show you the solution coming up as well. So the solution to this, so there's a number of ways to go about it. We could trigger this function right away. So without having to wait the 100 milliseconds, we could trigger it. So we could do something like this and go out and refresh the page. So what happens when we refresh the page? I know it's going pretty quickly. So we're actually starting at image 2. So that is a solution, but it's not ideal because we're incrementing the value. So we could also start out the default value of place image to -1 if we wanted. So that would take care of this as well. So there's a number of ways to do this to get it to start at image 1. Or if we wanted to, we could just simply update the value here with some of the default values that we have. So that is another option that we could do, that we could simply do this and just clean it up a little bit, and we could refresh it and then get rid of the swap image there because that's adding 1 to that image. So the ideal way is probably just to set that value here, and that way we're starting at image number 1. So there's a number of solutions to that one, and we can see that now it's starting at number 1. So what I want you to do now is to try this out for yourself, build out some images. You can get rid of the placeholder.com and add in some real images and make that update to the source code with actual real images, not using placeholder.com. Welcome back, and we've looked at a number of different event handlers, and in this lesson we're going to look at onKeyPress, onPaste for input forms as well. So let's create an input area, and for this input area, so I'm going to set it as text, and we all know that with HTML5 I can set it as a number, but for the purpose of this exercise, what I want to do with this input is I only want to restrict users to be able to add numbers. So my number input, or we'll just call it my num. So I only want users to be able to add in numbers. So no other characters, nothing but digits. So let's set up a function here. So on key press. So event listener there. And what we want to happen is that we want to fire off a function. And this function is going to be number check, or just shorten it there. So basically it's going to check for the number value there. So now let's set that up here. So we've got function num check. And so basically what's going to happen is we're going to check to see if event target is, and the value of that target is a number. So let's build that message function again. And message. So whatever value gets passed in the message, we're going to do the same one here, where we're just going to simply output it into our wrapper area. So document get element by ID, grab that one with the wrapper ID, and inner HTML equals M. So that way we can just send it as a variable value. So let's do this one first. So message, and we're going to send this target value. And it's actually going to send it a number of times. So let me show you what I mean. So basically, whenever I'm typing in there, we see that every time I update the key, it's updating that value. So this is pretty good as we're able to get that value, but it's not actually giving us that key value. So we need to actually return back the key value that was from the event. So let me show you how to do that. So instead of target value, we can do event key. And this is going to be the key that actually initiated that value. So that way we can do a check to see if these inputs are going to be a number or a digit. So it's as easy as that to make that check. And JavaScript has a built-in ability to actually check to see if a value is a number or not. And this is where we're going to use Boolean values. So let me open up the console. And JavaScript has a built-in method that can check to see if a value is a number or not. So in here, I'm just going to enter in some text. And we see that is nan and it's true. So not a number. So in order to find out if it's actually not a number, we need to do the negative. So again, going back to the operators, and now if I type in some text here, we can see that it's false. And if we do the opposite here, and if we update this value, so if I update this value with a number, then it's going to come back as true. So this is what we want to do, and we want to do a Boolean check of this key value to check to see if it's a number or not. And we're actually going to return something back to this event handler. And doing that, it gives us the ability, so if we're actually looking for a return back of a value, then we can actually limit content that's being output. So we can null the key press event. So let me show you how that works. So let's do the check is nan, and let's pass in that key event value. And what we're going to do is we're going to return this. And I'm also going to put that in here so that we can see what we're returning. So let's go back and refresh it, and we see false and we see true. And we still need to cut off the ability to be able to add in those values, and that's where we can add in a return. So what this is going to do is this is going to return on the key press, and if this is true, then it's going to allow it, and if it's false, because we're adding in this return, if this value is true, then we're going to be allowed to type the key. So let me show you what happens now. So now if I try to type in a character, all I get is false. If I try to type in numbers, I get true. So it completely disables the ability to type in anything but digits into my input field. So it's same thing, HTML5 does have number, but there are a number of uses for this type of functionality as well. And there's another one that I quickly wanted to add in, and that's on paste. So we know that we can prevent event from firing by doing returning back false. So this is the same thing as saying return false. So by doing return, so first I'll set it to return true. And what I'll try to do, we'll go back out, refresh the page, and I'm going to try to paste into there. And we're allowed to do that because it's return true. But if I do return false, let me go back out and refresh it again and try to paste something in there. It's not letting me paste, so I am trying to paste it in. So this is even more advanced functionality that you can do within your event handlers, where you can null them, basically stop them from firing off and continuing with that process. So now what I want you to do now is try this out for yourself. Try the on-key press, and you can start by just doing either true or false. And if you do false, then you're not going to be able to enter anything into that input field. And also, if you do on paste, return false, you're not going to be able to enter any content into that input field either. And the other thing that I want you to take away from this lesson as well is the isNaN method. So this is built into JavaScript, and it's a quick and easy way to tell if a value is a number, and if it's not a number, then it's going to return true. And if it is a number, then it's going to return false because it's not a number. So we do a double negative with the exclamation mark in front of it to return true if it is a number. So what I want you to do as well is open up your editor and create another input field that only takes characters, that doesn't take any numbers at all. So try that out, and I'll show you the solution as well. So it's really easy that we just do basically the opposite of what we did for this one. So I'm going to do, so it doesn't matter, and on key press return num check 2. And this time we're checking to make sure that the character is not a number. So we're going to get rid of this exclamation mark and name this to num check 2. And now let's go out and refresh it. So this one only takes characters, it doesn't take any numbers. This one only takes numbers. Welcome back, and in this lesson we're going to be showing you how to validate a form. So this is a really useful function for JavaScript, and we deal with forms all the time. So one of the things that we want to make sure with a form is that before the form submits, that we're actually checking to see if the fields that we're looking for are within the form. So this is where we're going to use on submit. So this is another event handler. And this time we're going to return, and we're going to do a validation of the form function. So this is going to work the same way as we saw earlier, where when we had an element and we returned back a value, so if the value was false, then we prevented the default action and we prevented that event from triggering. So we can do the same thing for the form. And notice the other thing here is that you've got a few options for where you want to place this validation. So typically we want to place it on the submission part of the form, and the form works as one. So even if we've got an input and we do type equals submit, so make sure that this one is submit and the value is submit, that this way we can submit forms, and this will work as the submission parts of the form. And if the form is being submitted, it'll run that check to make sure that the content within the form is valid. So next we need to set up a function in order to accommodate that validation check. So let's go back out and refresh it. And now when we submit it, where we're not getting anything back, we're not being able to do anything with the form because of the fact that we're not returning anything here. So we need to return either true or false. So let's return true and see what happens. So go back out and refresh, and when we submit it, we're actually submitting the form. So I actually need a target in order to submit it. So let's add those in. So that's action. And this is where we're submitting it. So we'll just do it to index 2. So that's one of the files that we had created earlier. And we'll do a method and get. So let's try this out now. So refresh. And now when we submit it, we're actually going to the form. And now if I update this to false, let's go back out and refresh it. And I'll try to submit the form and nothing happens. So we know that it works the same way. If we're returning a value, if it's false, then we're not going to get that event being triggered. So basically it's going to cancel out the submission of the form. And this is what we can do in order to check to make sure that all of our inputs are there. So let's do type, and let's add in some inputs here. And for this one, we're going to do some IDs. So do an ID and so do an ID of first name, And I can just simply duplicate these. So next we'll do last name. And we want all of these fields to be filled out. And last time, and maybe this one can be age or something like that to be a little bit different. So we want all of these values filled out within the form. And we also saw earlier that we can actually go through and we can go to the parent. So let's try that again where we get that target element. And so we're going to get the parent element. So that's the parent form that's being submitted. Actually, let's first take a look at what the event target is, because this is important to note that we've got the actual event handler on the parent itself. So that was typically the parent that we were using. So let's refresh this and open up our console. And when we submit it, we see that we are grabbing the form. So we don't have to even traverse up any additional levels, that we know that we're already on the level that we want to be. And we can go into those child nodes and we see that we've got the children. So we've got age, first name, and last name. So we can make use of that information that's contained within there. So we can do children. And then we've got the first name, last name, and so on. So let's set up a variable, and I'm just going to call it P. So this is going to hold all of that event information, that object. So this will be shorter, and we can console log this out. So now that I've got that in, I can simply check to see if there's values. So we're going to rely on conditions again in order to check to see if there's a value for first name. So let's make sure that if first name is blank, then we're going to return some type of error, and we're going to return back false. And we know from previously when we were looking at functions, whenever we do a return of a function, that stops the rest of the code from running. So we don't have to worry about any of the stuff down here because we're returning false over here. So we know that if first name is blank, then we're going to return back false. And we can also pass something into that message function that we created earlier. So message, and let's say needs a first name. And so now let's try this out. And basically, if everything passes, then we can return back true. And then the form will submit. So let's see if this works. So now we try to submit it. Let's go back. And there's one thing that I did forget. So I need to add in value there because we're checking to see if the value of that element is equal to this. So let's refresh now and we submit. So now it says needs a first name. When we put in something there, we can see that that works now. So if we don't have any values in there, we can't submit the form. It just tells us it needs a first name. So what I want you to do now is pause the video and update the rest of the fields. So update conditions for last name and age, and then return back false and write the appropriate messages for those fields. So pause the video, build out the form, and build out a form validation. And I'll show you how to do that as well coming up. So we saw that we can build out a form validation. I'm just going to do some quick updates to the form. This is going to be first. This is last. And then this is age. So we have some values there that we can take a look at. Now we can try to submit it. Needs a first name. So the challenge was to update this so that we can do last name and age so that all of the fields are required. So let's do that. Let's take care of that and check to see if there's a value for age. And if all of these values are good, then we should be good to go. Needs an age. So let's try this out. Go back out, refresh the page. Submit needs a first name. Submit needs a last name. Submit needs an age. And then lastly, we're able to submit the form. So go ahead, try it out for yourself. And in the next lesson, we're going to show you even more you can do with the DOM. Welcome back, and in this lesson, we're going to be looking at the drag and drop event handlers that are available within the DOM. So I've set up basic CSS where I can create essentially a box. So let's do that, and we'll use class. So box. So I want to set up two divs, 1 and 2, and then I want the ability to actually drag between the two divs. Let's go back out and refresh it. And I also want to put a border around there. So border. So do one pick solid black border. And go back and refresh it. So there we go. So we've got basically our two slots in order to drag and drop. So we're going to attempt to move an element from one box into the other. So now we need to create that element that we can start to pull in. So let's create it within that first box. So this one will be a div, and we'll give it an ID, and we'll call it get L. So to get the element. And then and it'll say drag me please. So let's go back out, refresh it. So we've got one that says drag me please, and then the other one doesn't have anything in it as of yet. And I'm also going to add some colors to this element. So get L, and we'll give it a background color so that we can more easily identify it. So there we go. So now let's refresh it. So that's the element that we want to drag, and we want to be able to drag it and drop it off into the other box. So there's the event listener that's on drag. So we've got a number of different ones here. So we've got on drag stop, over, leave, enter, end, on drag, on drop. So these are the ones that we're going to be using. On drag start. So we need to have d start. So this is the function that we want to fire off whenever the drag starts. And we should call it d start. So let's set up that function within our JavaScript. So basically, this is firing off whenever the drag is starting, and let's update the message. Drag started. So that's all that's going to happen right now. So let's refresh it. And we need to actually add an attribute here as well. So this we need to add the attribute draggable. So draggable has to equal true. So that basically allows that element to become draggable. So let's refresh it. So we can see now when we refresh the page, when we select it and we start dragging it, we've got drag started. So that's the message that we want. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to have somewhere where we can actually drop it. So let's add those in. So within the box there, we're going to add another event listener. So this one's called on drag, or it should be actually on drop. So on drop, we need to fire off. So d drop. This is the event that we want to fire off. So on drop, we want to fire off d drop. And I want to add that to the other box as well, because they need to be the same. And then the other thing too that we need to also, so they have on drag over. So this is something that can fire off whenever the element is on top of another one. And so basically we want to disable this. So we want to no drop. So basically we want to have a no drop function, and this one, all this is going to do is this is basically going to prevent the ability to drag over. So let's update and add in our functions within a JavaScript. So there was n drop. So the default to it is drag over, so we want to prevent the default. And there's a built-in method within JavaScript as well to do that. And this one actually becomes really useful because this allows you to prevent defaults of typical actions. So if you do this on a link or something else, you can basically prevent the default action of that element. We know that a lot of elements like hyperlinks, they have default actions, and whenever you're drag over, there's default elements with default actions within the elements. So we can disable that by doing event prevent default. So basically now we can't drag over it, which is what we want because we want the ability to be able to drop it in. So function, and last one is ddrop. So this is the function that fires off, and we'll say within here that drop it. So it'll just say drop it for now. So let's go back out and refresh it, and now we can drag it and drag start it, and we can see drop it. So everything is working, but we're not transferring the element. So that's because there's a few things that we need to still take care of. So one of them is we need to prevent the default. So we want to prevent the default action of dropping. And the other thing that we want to do is we want to check to see if the target is actually where we want to drop it. So it has to be one of the boxes, and we need to check. So this is a condition where we check to see if the event target, so remember the event target from before, so we're still using that because it contains a whole bunch of information, and we can check to see class names within it as well. So we can check to see if the class name is equal to box, which it has to be in order for us to drop it, then we know that we're okay to drop. And there's a few other things that we still need to add in. So we need to have a default global variable that can hold the item, basically. So what we want to do is when we start the drag, we want to add into the hold item the event target. So basically what we've picked up, we want to drop in to the hold item, and that way we know that we've got the hold item, and we can remove it from there, and then we can drop it into the new place. So going over to here, so we know that it is a box, so we're all good to go, and we're going to use another built-in method within the DOM. So basically this adds a node at the end of the child's list of the parent node. So we can basically append a child, and what we want to do is we want to append that item that we're dragging in on top. And that one is going to be under holder item. So we want to append the child with the holder item. So let's see how this works, and there's still a few other things that we still need to finish off, but we can see that we're able to kind of drag and drop it, and everything seems to be working properly. Let me add in some identifiers here for these divs, because the boxes, we don't have anything to identify them as of yet, so I'll just do 1 and 2, and I'm also going to make them a little bit bigger as well. And I'm also going to give them some padding and margin. So margin 0 and 50 pixels. So let's refresh it now. So now we can see that we can drag and drop it into different elements, and everything is working properly. So that's how you can do a drag and drop of elements, and you just got to make sure that you do cancel out the events. So in this one, we learned that we can prevent the default events from firing off by doing prevent default on the event object. And we also saw how we can go through and we can append into our elements, so we can append content into them as well. And now I want you to pause the video and add in a few more boxes. So add in 2 more boxes, and I'll show you how to do that coming up. So 1 and 2, add in a few extra boxes, go back out and refresh it. So now we've got a number of boxes, and everything should still work the same way, where we can drag and drop it into any one of those boxes, because they all share those same properties and they all have the same event listeners. The drop and the drag over has been disabled, so they're able to drag and drop elements into anyone that has the class of box. Welcome, and in this lesson we're going to be building out a game. So the game basically is going to be a set of names from an array. It's all going to be built out using JavaScript, so nothing within the HTML. We're going to be going off an array. It's going to scramble all the names in the array, and the object of the game is to find the name that they're specifying. So once you hit the name, then the cell disappears and you move on to the next one, and you see how many you can find and how quickly you can find them, and so on. So it's a fun little game, and it's fully dynamic, so it will update as you update even more items in the array. So I'm going to show you how to build this out. So let's begin. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to set up the HTML. So we know that going over here, we've got a button. So this is our start button, and this basically starts the game. It gives us the ability to restart the game and so on. So let's type that in. So type and button, and we'll set a value for it. So the value for it is start. So just like what we have here on the right hand side, and we're going to do an on click, and basically we're going to start. Once that gets clicked, we're going to start the function start, and I'm going to also add a class there to style it a little bit as well. Let's go up to the style, and let's add in some styling for the button. So the button, we've set a height for the button. So this could be 50 pixels. We're going to set a width for the button. So let's do 100 pixels for the width. And background color, so you don't have to design it the same way that I'm doing it. So this is just a quick button design. Color is going to be white. And border radius. So I don't want to focus too much time on what we're doing here within the CSS. So I'm going to create some quick CSS here in order so we can get that styling. And then lastly, the font size. And of course, you can always customize it afterwards to make it look different, look better, and have some of the content stand out more. So basically, there we go. So we've got our button, and we've also got 2 message areas. So let's set those up as well. And these are just divs, and we're going to use classes. So message 1. And at first, let's put a default placeholder there, so welcome message. And actually, let's just use IDs. So ID. So message 1 and message 2. And message 2 will say click start. And then we also need a game area. So let's give this one an ID, and this will be where our output goes. So basically, this is our container for the game, and this is all we really need for our HTML. So the next thing that we need, I need to also add a little bit more styling. So before we begin, I need to set up a box area. So these are these boxes here that you see here on the right hand side. So they're actually boxes, so they're 100 by 100, and this is where I'm containing the names. and it's text align. So we're center aligning the text. And I've also got a border around it as well. And this is just a simple black border. And I'm also going to display it as inline block so that they stack. So inline block. So transform it from block to inline block, because these are going to be divs or whatever we build them out as. So the next thing that we need to do is create some arrays. So first of all, we need an array to hold the brand new elements that we're creating, or the names that we're going to be creating from the other array. So that's basically the my array is our holder array, and this one is going to be an actual array with some contents. So we've got some names that we're going to fill out there, and these could be anything. So for right now, I've just got 9 default names there that we can use. And then lastly, we need one more variable, and I'm just going to call this one key. So this is going to give us the ability to basically, so this will hold the value that we need to search for. So basically right now it's holding Lawrence, and that's the key. So that's the value that's being searched for. So our first function that we're going to encounter is start. So this one is the one that actually starts the game. So let's add that one in first. So function, and we're initiating that from the onClick attribute over here. So we're just initiating start. So this is starting the game. So the first thing that we need to do within starting the game, we need to build out this my array. And we can populate it with information from over here from people. So let's do that first. So let's take my array, and what we're going to do is we're going to take people, and we're going to slice from our people array. So what this does is this basically duplicates the contents of people array into my array. So if you just do my array equals people, then we're going to be tying the values together. And if we're removing from my array, we're going to remove from people. So that's one of those quirks with JavaScript where if you're copying arrays, you've got to do it this way. So this is the format to copy one array into another. So the next thing that we need to do is I want to randomize this array, because you notice that within here, they're not within the same order as that array is. So let's do a way to randomize, and we can do it with array sort. And this is another really tricky little function that comes in useful that gives you the ability to sort an array. So we're sorting the array function within here, and we're returning within the array, so it's 0.5 minus math random. So this is just a formula you can use as well. So this is a way to randomize the array, and then what I'll do is I'll console log out the my array so we can take a look at what we're doing here within the function. So just to make sure that everything is working so far. So let's go back out, we'll refresh it, so we've got our start, and when we click start, then we've got our array there. So we're clicking it, and you can see here that every time I click it, I get another random assortment available to me. So I keep clicking, and I'm getting a new randomizing of the array. So that everything is working, and so far so good. We've randomized the array. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to build out the application, and then we need to run a function. So we need to build out game area, and we need to, after we build out the game area, we need to run find the name. So we need to ask the user to find a name. So what I want you to do now, pause the video, open up your editor, and create the same format that I have. Create an array, and then copy that array into another array. And then you'll notice that once you sort it, if you do it this way, so first try it without the slice, and you're going to find that you're actually sorting people as well when you do the sort function. So this one you'll probably have to copy out this statement here, as it's a real short format for shuffling an array. We could also use the functionality that we had looked at earlier, where we built out that function to shuffle arrays. Although this is shorter, you can take that one as well and bring that into this project. So it will do the same thing, where you could pass that newly built array and then shuffle that array information. So what I want you to do as well is to create a function called build. So this is the one we're going to be building our game board. And we've done this before as well in a previous exercise, where we can loop through a series of values and we can build out some HTML. So what we want to do this time is we want to loop through all of the values in the array. So it's actually going to be the my array, not the people array. Loop through all of them and build out a set of divs that have the contents of these elements within them. And I'll show you how to do this in the upcoming lesson. Welcome back, and in the last lesson we left off building out our game board. So we know we need to set up a function called build in order to output our game board. And our game board is going to be built out from a loop. So we know that the loop is going to be based around the length of our array values. So let's set x to equal 0, and we're going to loop through x while my array length is greater than the value of x, and then just increment x. So this is our basic foundation for building out this loop. We also need a holder for it, so I'm going to set up some HTML, and I'm going to start that off by, I'll call it the name game. So I want to create a default value, because within here, all I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be just incrementing HTML. So I'm going to be adding, concatenating even more and more to it as we build out that object. And then lastly, I'm going to do the document get element by ID, and then select our output area, and then update the inner HTML with HTML value from the variable. So that's what we're going to be building out. So next, what we need to do is we need to populate some type of values in here. And usually when I'm generating these dynamically, I use the single quotes. This is because I usually like to keep the double quotes within my HTML. So div, and give them a class of box. So these are those box elements that we created. And we need to add a string value in there. So I'm just going to call it, I'm going to put hidden in it for now, so that this is, because we don't want the users to be able to see the contents of this as of yet. And we're going to use the mouse over and mouse out and the mouse click as well as event handlers for this exercise. So hidden, and I'm going to just do the value of x, or maybe I can do x plus 1. So that we're not starting at 0, because we know that arrays do start at 0. So that's it. So we'll increment it out, and let's see where we are right now. So we hit start, we build out all of the elements. So right now it's hidden, and right now not much is happening. So we need to add in the mouse over, but we also need to add in that string value. So I'm going to just create a holder here called string, and it's going to take the value of my array x. And I'm also going to show you a quick way to scramble the letters. So this is a combination of what you can do with strings. It's a string method, and we are going to be looking at this later on in the course. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but basically what this does is similar to the function that we have up here. So this will randomize basically we're splitting off, so we're splitting the strings, then we're sorting them, and then we're randomizing them, and then we're joining them all back together again. So basically what's going to happen is that we get a shuffled value of that string value. So what I can do temporarily, I can output it here underneath that hidden. So let's do that so we can actually see it. So let's refresh the browser, hit start. So now we've got the scrambled names, and you can see that every time it's scrambling them differently. So this is just adds an added element into the gameplay. So this does not need to be there. It's just adding that scrambled effect so that these names are not as easy to read and that you can't click on it. And sometimes you can even make a mistake with it if you're trying to go too quickly. So that gives a little bit more added benefit into the gameplay. All right, so we want it to use the mouse over, on mouse over, and on mouse out in order to show the text. So we want to show the shuffled value, and then we want to hide it again. So let's add those event listeners. So on mouse over. And we also want to add on mouse out so that we can actually reset on mouse out. So this will actually reset it back to what it was. So basically this should say that same value, that hidden x plus 1. So what I want to do is I actually want to pass these values up. So let's create some functions. So I create a function to update the text. So basically this is going to be updating the text as we move out. So we need to pass in the values that we want to update. And I want to pass in this, as well as pass in the value that was the shuffled value. And this is actually going to get a little bit tricky because of the quotes. So we've got the double quotes, we've got the single quotes, and in here we need to break out of the double quotes. So we do have our way to break out of the quotes. So we can break out of that quote and we can do our actual single quote. So that's just two of them in a row. Let's add that value that was the shuffled value, because this is what I want the text to actually say. And let's finish off that and then break out of the, escape the character as well. So we're escaping that single quote. So basically we're able to escape the single quote that way. And the other one is going to actually pass that same function. So we're going to pass it up to uText, and it's going to pass in this, and this time instead of the shuffled value, it's going to pass in hidden. So it's going to say the same thing that it already says, hidden, and we need to pass in the value of x plus 1. So the function for this one now, I want you to pause the video and create a function called uText to take in these parameters and update the values that are available within that element that's been selected. And we're passing this over so we can retrieve it as well on the other end. And we could also not pass over this, and we could use the event target. So that's optional as well. So what we need to do now is we need to update the inner text of this. So let me show you how we can do that. So pause the video, give it a try, and I'll show you the solution. So the solution is picking up those both as parameters, and we're going to do t, so that's the this object. So basically the current object, we're just picking that up in there, and then the message is simply the content that we're sending over there. So let's go back out and we'll refresh the page, click start, and now whenever we hover over it, we see that we get, we can hover in and hover out, and we get a quick glimpse at the name that's being hidden there. So there was one more event listener that I wanted to add in here, and that's going to be the on click. So we're going to do it within that same format. And this one, we need to have a way to remove the element and check if it's right. So we'll just call it RL. So this will be removing the element, and we're going to pass over the same parameters. And instead of uText, let's pass this over. And instead of passing over shuffled, we're going to pass over the actual string value. So the unscrambled string value is what we're going to pass over there. So that's onClick, and we still need to create the function for that. So what I want you to do now, pause the video, create the function for this to pick up this information that's contained within here. And then the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a condition in order to match and check to see if the users selected the right value. So let's go ahead and create that function. So this function is the one that we're going to launch when the user is making their guess to see if they've actually selected the right person. So we're passing in the this object, and we're also passing in the correct string value. So we know that we want to place the key that we're looking for within the global key value. So we know that we can do a quick check to see if S is going to be equal to key, and if it is, then we know that they've got it correct. So this is correct, and else they got it wrong. So we need to create some type of actions for that as well. So again, if you could pause the video and add in the messaging. So just as we did before where we could send messages to one of the elements, we've got two of them now. So we need a message1 and a message2 function in order to send and retrieve messages so that we don't have to comment them in here. We can actually output them visually to the player of the game. So pause the video and add those in. And I'll show you how to do that as well. So message1, and we're picking up our message within this function. And what we're doing is we're simply outputting it. So we're doing document get element by ID. And I know we've done this a number of times, but it's always good to practice this up because this is really important to just get really familiar with all of the selection process and so on. So this one is message, so it's going to output the message to the top one, and then we're going to duplicate it and do a second one here at the bottom. So that sets up both of our messaging functions. So let's go back up to our start game function. So we've got build is taken care of. And lastly, we need to create a function in order to find the user's name. So we need to initiate that. So this one, we're just going to call it find person. And we'll launch that one, and we're going to add this one just underneath here. So basically, this is where we're actually going to do a randomizer for the key value. So let's set that key value here and add in a random value, and then we're going to put it in message1 that find this name. So find this name, and then let's add in the value of key. So what I want you to do now as well is to pause the video and go back to one of the earlier lessons where we found a random value from the array. So remember, we were using math floor and math random, and we're multiplying it by the array length, and that basically gave us a random index value from the items in the array, and then we could return back a random value. So pause the video and put that value into key here to grab a random item from the array, and I'll show you how to do that. So first of all, we're going to just need the array. So I'm going to do it within one statement. And these were the math statements. So math floor, because we know that we're going to return back a value that's going to have a big decimal point list attached to it. So let's do math random. And when we multiply math random by a number, that gives us a random value from 0 to that number. So if we multiply it by the array length, then we get a random value from 0 to the length of the array, and that's exactly what we need to produce a random value. So now let's refresh the page and click Start, and it says Find Lawrence. And I still, it looks like I forgot one of the quotes here. So let's refresh that again, and hopefully this time it builds out the name. So find Mike. So now we've got our action, we've got Mike down here, and the next part of the game is to finish off this function where we can click it and we can check to see if the values are matching. So that's coming up in the next lesson.